Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for ETR's latest macro survey findings webinar. As a reminder, each survey we conduct is accompanied by a comprehensive data findings report, and the entire survey and data visualization dashboards are currently available on the ETR platform. In addition, the ETR Insights team is continually hosting qualitative discussions with our ITDM community to provide end-user feedback and analysis around the enterprise technology trends that our data uncovers. Each interview is published with a full transcript, video replay, and executive summary, all of which feed our comprehensive and searchable ETR Insights library, also available on the ETR platform. ETR also has its own expert network populated with the ITDM decision makers in our community, which is quickly becoming a preferred provider for our savvy tech-focused clients. As always, you can reach out to us at service@etr.ai to request any of the proprietary research or to get started on your own custom surveys and projects. Now on to the macro findings. ETR's macro survey consistently tracks and updates core trends like budget growth, spending priorities, and organizational trends, but also quickly iterates the macro survey topics based on shifting priorities, technology trends, and most importantly, client feedback. As an example, this January 24 macro survey will highlight a few select findings from our recent State of Generative AI survey. If you would like to see the full data findings from that Gen AI report, please reach out to your service team. And as always, keep the communication coming. We always love to hear your feedback and ideas. With that out of the way, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Eric Bradley, and I am joined today by my ETR research analyst colleagues, Dr. Darren Brabham and Jake Fabrizio, who will be joining me in the analysis on this call. This macro survey opened up in the first week of December and closed just last week. This survey captured record participation from more than 1,750 IT decision makers, with nearly 25% hailing from Global 2000 organizations. 60% of respondents held C-suite or director-level titles, and we continue to thoughtfully organize our IT respondent community to represent a diverse cross-section of industry verticals, although the high-budget sectors of IT telco, services consulting, and financials insurance combine for roughly half of the respondents and are purposefully curated to capture large swaths of enterprise IT dollars. Lastly, the survey respondent breakdown by enterprise size is represented by just under 2/3 large enterprise and just over 1/3 mid to small enterprises. With the final survey tally completed, we first look back at the full year 2023 budget growth and see that the final number came in at a 3.4% increase, higher than the previously reported expectations of 2.9%, captured by survey takers back in October. We also see that IT spending estimates for this first quarter of 2024 start off a bit more tepid than both last survey's projection and the full year expectation. For Q1, survey respondents foretell 2.4% spending growth, down from 2.8%. However, on a more positive note, respondents are optimistic about 2024 spending, with the current full-year growth expectations set at 4.3%, after being revised higher from the 3.8% level captured 3 months ago. Here we take a closer look at which respondent subsamples in our survey have the most optimistic and pessimistic outlooks for IT spending. Focusing in on total 2024 estimates compared to total 2023 IT spend, we see that despite the aggregate revision higher in spending estimates, some critical respondent subsamples fall below the mean of 4.3%. Specifically, large organizations are not quite reaching the overall average levels of spend, with Global 2000 respondents particularly lagging by a wide margin, with an expected growth rate of only 2.3%, which is lower than the prior survey levels of 2.6% within this cohort. Fortune 500 fares a bit better at 3.2%, but is still not quite catching up with the total respondent mean. Making up for their miserly outlook, both small and mid-sized organizations are much more optimistic, with 6.5 and 5% growth expected, respectively. By industry vertical, it is the energy and utilities demographic that leads all spending projections at 5.4% growth. Following 2 consecutive surveys in the top spot, retail and consumer organizations indicate a slight cooling off as growth expectations were revised lower, from 5% to 4%. Overall, 4 of the 6 industry vertical buckets all indicate higher spending projections than they did 3 months ago, adding to the broader trend line higher. Lastly, by region, North America and EMEA showed an increase, and APAC respondents exhibited the highest spending growth expectations. Despite a revision lower, Latin America spending remains quite elevated. And with that, we hand it off to Jake to continue with the data findings from this period.
Thank you, Eric. In this model, we'll review the primary methods used by organizations indicating a decrease in IT spending for Q1 2024 to actually achieve those budget decreases. First, we can see a sizable jump in those planning to reduce staffing costs, from 19% to 23%, cementing its place as the most commonly used method to decrease spend. After that, delaying or stopping new projects has decreased slightly, but remains the second highest method, followed by reducing consulting and IT outsourcing spend and reducing hardware and CapEx spend. Respondents also anticipate continuing on with the consolidation of redundant vendors across business units. Now we'll take a look at broader trends within the enterprise. First off, an optimistic trend. In the blue, we can see an uptick in organizations planning to accelerate new IT deployments and projects, while plans to freeze IT projects is ticking lower. Next, plans to increase hiring have eased slightly as hiring freezes stabilize. Finally, the great work from home versus RTO debate. After declining rapidly over the course of 2022, the proportion of organizations with remote workers is now leveling out, currently at 43%. Meanwhile, the proportion of fully in-office work has ticked up to 22% of our sample. Moving on to IT priorities. Information security remains the top priority over the next 12 months, though with a smaller average ranking lead than prior survey periods. Machine learning and artificial intelligence continues to climb in priority, overtaking cloud migration and collaboration and productivity, and now falls in line with analytics and data warehousing for the second highest spot in the ranking. Cloud migration and networking have both fallen in their average rankings, while robotic process automation remains stable in the last spot.
It's hard to miss the buzz that artificial intelligence has been making in the news these days. It was a growing focus for many organizations in 2023 and will no doubt continue to grow in prominence this year. Within the ML and AI domain, though, we wanted to know what were the top priorities in the coming year. Our respondents told us that chatbots, conversational AI, generative AI, and large language models were the top priority this time. This priority jumped the most from 6 months ago, now overtaking scoping relevant business use cases for the #1 spot. Scoping relevant business use cases is now second priority, and data preparation and organization is third. And so generative AI and large language models have no doubt been the darling of the headlines lately, and ETR has recently published a separate drill down report on generative AI that clients can find in the report section of our website. The next few slides cherry pick some of the highlights from that generative AI report. Here we have trends around evaluation rates for generative AI. As you can see on the left columns, the answer choice of no, we're not evaluating generative AI keeps dropping each time we field this survey question. And this means that the percentage of those who are evaluating generative AI for business use cases keeps growing. Just 6 months ago, a third were not evaluating it. Today, less than a quarter are not evaluating, meaning that now more than 3/4 of organizations are seriously evaluating generative AI in the business. Customer support, text and data summarization, code generation and documentation, and writing marketing and sales content are the top 4 business use cases in order for which organizations are evaluating generative AI. These rates have also grown each survey. Next, we asked our respondents where the money was coming from to fuel all these new generative AI priorities. It turns out about half of generative AI budget dollars are newly added, while 40% are being reallocated from elsewhere in the business. And among those 40% of respondents who said generative AI budgets were being reallocated from elsewhere, we asked where that money was coming from specifically in the organization. A quarter said the money was coming from business applications budgets. 21% said non-IT departments were the source of funds, and 16% said productivity applications were the source of generative AI project funds. These findings do make logical sense on their face. Much of the optimism around generative AI, and indeed a lot of the early demonstrations of generative AI from vendors, focuses on increasing productivity and enabling business units to do more in a self-service way. It makes sense then that business applications, non-IT business units, and productivity apps would make for prime targets to source funds for generative AI projects. Notably, only 7% of respondents said robotic process automation would be a source of funds for generative AI projects. Again, this resonates. Anecdotally, through our ETR Insights interviews with IT decision makers, we hear of many organizations trying their hand at both generative AI and RPA projects at the same time, seeing both avenues as critical to broader digital transformation and business efficiency journeys. This has been just a taste of some of the great data we have in our generative AI report. You can find many more insights on this topic by searching for it in our reports marketplace. And now back to the rest of our Macro Views webinar.
This model shows top priorities within database and data warehousing. Once again, data warehousing for analytics remains the top priority, followed by data lakes for analytics and data science, and improvements to data modeling and data quality, respectively. This resonates with findings from our generative AI drill down, where improving data quality and improving overall data systems were the two most cited methods for improving data analytics programs to better support generative AI goals. After that, cloud migrations ranked slightly lower in priority than in July 2023, now in line with relational databases. Trailing the pack, NoSQL and graph databases remain notably weaker than other database priorities in 2024. Not much has changed since July 2023 when it comes to enterprise application priorities. Customer relationship management remains the top priority over the next 12 months by a margin. The remaining priorities are all relatively even in terms of organization priority over the next 12 months, with supply chain management trailing just slightly behind. With that, I'll pass the mic back over to Eric with some vendor-specific spending takeaways.
Thank you, Jake. Up next are a few slides that have become client favorites, which is no surprise because they originated directly from client requests. Take that as a reminder to keep the lines of communication with your service reps open and let us know what types of data and analysis you find valuable in future survey iterations. In this analysis, the ETR analytics team created a sliding scale to see how individual vendors within their respective sectors would be impacted by shifting IT budgets. The underlying basis is to see how vendor net scores correlate with survey respondents planning negative spend, flat spend, or positive spend, with a focus on 2024 Q1. In these slides, we further break down the analysis by sectors, alphabetically, in which we track the vendors in. Let's kick it off with the observability group of our analytics sector, where Datadog and Splunk both see notably lower spending intentions among those respondents with flat or negative Q1 expectations. A potentially ominous sign for vendors already operating in a crowded marketplace facing some headwinds. Conversely, cloud giants Microsoft and AWS are positively aligned with respondents indicating rising spend, as both see ascending net scores within the analytics, big data, cloud, and database data warehousing sectors. Within the enterprise application sector, SAP finds itself in this rather inauspicious analysis for the third consecutive survey, along with Zendesk, who is making their first appearance on this list. Next, we switch to the information security and infrastructure software sectors. Standouts in InfoSec are numerous and include the core trio of vulnerability management players, along with Juniper, Checkpoint, and Trend Micro, as a group seeing the largest disparity between positively spending respondents and negative spending ones. This could be a tailwind or headwind depending on how the spending environment unfolds, but the data exhibits increased potential volatility among these vendors, more so than their peers. And wrapping up with this analysis, we see that the most recent data also captured some standout vendors in the productivity app sector, including Microsoft and Slack capturing high relativity to varying spending inflections. Lastly, both core Cisco and Meraki within networking indicate a potentially wide range of net score variation between those respondents with positive and negative first quarter spend. And with that, I'm going to kick it back to the tenor tones of Dr. Brabham to wrap us up. Back to you, Darren.
And this concludes our Macro Views webinar. ETR has 3 flagship surveys we conduct multiple times a year: the Technology Spending Intention Survey, the Emerging Technology Survey, and the Macro Views Survey, all powered by our thoroughly vetted and constantly growing ETR community of IT decision makers. We have interactive data visualizations, reports, and webinar replays from these surveys on our site. ETR also has a growing body of qualitative research from our ETR Insights interview series. These one-on-one and panel interviews with IT decision makers help tell the stories behind the data, and a searchable transcript library and associated analyst-written summaries are accessible through the reports marketplace. We also do custom surveys and focus group panels and interviews for organizations seeking best-in-class bespoke research on enterprise IT topics. And lastly, don't forget, ETR has its own expert network service called ETR Connect, where you can conduct one-on-one calls with members from our IT decision maker community. Be on the lookout for sector and vendor-specific reports and the full TSIS findings webinar, where we discuss our vendor data sets of highest conviction. Following the TSIS webinar a week from today, all materials will be available on the ETR platform. Until next time, take care.